It's the kind of love story that makes you believe in fairy tales, the kind where everyone around you says they were meant to be. On the surface, their lives were flawless. Marcus Williams and Clara Jacobs were the embodiment of marital bliss. But when the veil of perfection is pulled away, what lurks beneath may not only destroy their lives, but also lead to a chilling crime that would haunt their city forever. It began in the heart of Atlanta, Georgia, a bustling metropolis known for its rich history and vibrant community. Marcus and Clara were the couple that everyone admired. He was a 30-year-old software developer, ambitious, quiet, but determined. She, 28, was a beautiful, confident woman with a magnetic smile, a fashion designer with dreams of turning her small boutique into a national brand. They had met in college, their paths crossing at a university party that neither of them had expected to attend, but that would forever alter the course of their lives. Marcus had always been the strong, silent type, the kind of man who made you feel safe simply by being in the room. He wasn't one for flashy displays of emotion, but his actions spoke volumes. He loved with a fierce loyalty, his values rooted in family, faith, and honesty. He was the kind of man you would call in the middle of the night if your car broke down, or the kind of man who would lend you his last dollar without asking for it back. Those who knew Marcus never doubted his sincerity. Clara, on the other hand, was the opposite. She was the woman who entered a room and instantly captivated everyone around her. Tall, with smooth, dark skin that seemed to glow, she had a natural beauty that drew eyes, but it was her charm and warmth that made people feel special. Clara had always been the life of the party, the one with the quick wit and infectious laugh. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and make everyone feel like they had known her for years. Her love for Marcus was deep, but Clara's heart was a puzzle. There were parts of her that Marcus couldn't fully reach, parts she kept buried, hidden in the recesses of her past, the kind of secrets that seemed to fester, quietly growing, waiting for the right moment to surface. Their whirlwind romance was the stuff of dreams. From their first date at a hole-in-the-wall sushi restaurant to their first kiss under the moonlight, everything seemed perfect. They were inseparable. Friends and family were in awe of their connection. Within months, Marcus proposed. Clara said yes without hesitation, tears of joy streaming down her face as she kissed him. Their wedding was a fairy tale, held in a beautiful cathedral, surrounded by friends, family, and love. The honeymoon followed, a luxurious trip to the Caribbean. It was everything they had dreamed of: sun, sand, romance, and adventure. Yet, even in paradise, Marcus couldn't ignore the flicker of unease in the back of his mind. There were moments when Clara would become distant, her eyes staring off into the horizon as if she were lost in thought. The times when she would go silent for hours, her phone never too far from her, even when they were supposed to be spending time together. Marcus dismissed these moments as nothing more than nerves. After all, who wouldn't be nervous about starting a new life? But as they settled into their new home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, that unease slowly began to turn into something more. The house was everything Marcus had dreamed of, a spacious 3-bedroom with a white picket fence, a perfect place to start their family. Yet Clara's behavior started to shift. She was still the charming, beautiful woman he had fallen in love with, but there were things she did now that made him uncomfortable. It started with the phone. Clara had always been protective of her privacy, but now she took it to a new level. Her phone was always locked, and when Marcus would glance at her, she would quickly turn it face down. When he asked about it, she brushed it off, saying she had work-related texts, that it was nothing to worry about. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more. He knew Clara had a past, everyone did, but this was different. She seemed more guarded than before, more secretive. Then there was her late nights at the boutique. Clara's fashion business was growing, which meant long hours spent designing, meeting clients, and building her brand. At least, that was the excuse she gave. But when Marcus would drop by to surprise her, the boutique would sometimes be empty, or Clara would still be on the phone with someone when he arrived, her voice lowered to a whisper. Marcus never questioned her, After all, he trusted Clara. He loved her. He convinced himself that it was all just part of the pressures of running a business. Yet deep down the growing doubt was festering, like a slow, unrelenting tide. It wasn't until that fateful evening, 2 years into their marriage, that the storm would finally break. Clara had been acting more distant than usual. She'd come home late again, her eyes red as if she had been crying. When Marcus asked her what was wrong, she brushed him off with the same tired excuse. "Just a rough day at the boutique. I'll be fine, babe. Really." But there was something about the way she said it, something in her voice that made Marcus feel as though he was being shut out, pushed away. Later that night, after Clara had gone to bed, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. The doubts, the questions, the unease, it all had built to a point where he could no longer ignore it. He got out of bed, the darkness of the house pressing in on him, and walked down the hallway to Clara's office, where she sometimes worked late into the night. It was there, in her desk drawer, where Marcus would find the first crack in their seemingly perfect life. The quiet hum of the night was all Marcus could hear as he stood in Clara's office, the soft glow from the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. His heart was pounding in his chest, a mixture of curiosity and unease tightening his throat. He had never been the kind of man to snoop. He trusted Clara with everything. But tonight, something inside him told him he couldn't just sit back and ignore the growing feeling of dread. His hand trembled as he pulled open the top drawer of her desk. He'd seen Clara rummaging through it in the past, but tonight it felt different, like there was something hidden, something important. At first, it was just the usual assortment of paperwork, receipts, old sketches, client contracts. But then his fingers brushed against something unexpected, a small, unmarked envelope. Curious, Marcus picked it up, feeling the weight of it as if it held a secret too heavy to keep. He opened it slowly, the rustling of the paper filling the stillness of the room. Inside there was a birth certificate, unfamiliar, stamped, and official. His eyes narrowed as he read the name, Clara Matthews. His stomach dropped, a tight knot of confusion forming in his gut. But it wasn't the name that disturbed him. It was the gender listed at birth. Male. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He blinked, his hands suddenly cold, as he processed what he was looking at. A birth certificate, with Clara's name, but a different gender. The revelation was like a sharp slap to his face, knocking the breath from his lungs. No, this can't be real, he thought, his mind racing. He pulled out more documents from the envelope, medical records, test results, prescriptions, and something even more shocking, a history of gender transition. The words jumped off the page: hormone replacement therapy, gender dysphoria treatment, surgical transition. His hand shook violently as the reality of what he was holding sunk in. Clara hadn't just been a woman who'd experienced a difficult childhood, as she'd once described it. Clara had become a woman. The woman he had married, the woman he had loved, had kept this from him. This secret, buried deep in her past, was now in his hands, and Marcus was struggling to understand how it could have happened. Why would she keep this from him? How could she? His head spun, and he took a few unsteady steps back, leaning against the desk for support. His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. The woman he thought he knew, the woman he had married just a few years ago, was now a stranger to him. How could Clara hide this from him? They had talked about everything, her dreams, her struggles, her childhood. They had shared intimate moments, their deepest fears. And yet Clara had never mentioned this. She had kept it hidden. She had lied. The betrayal felt like a physical blow to his chest. He could feel his heartbeat pounding in his ears as anger bubbled to the surface. The pain of it, knowing that Clara had kept this from him, was unbearable. How could she have lied to him for so long? Was their entire relationship built on a lie? Marcus ran his hands through his hair, trying to steady himself, but the rage inside him was bubbling up. He wanted to confront Clara right then and there, but part of him knew it wouldn't be that simple. He needed answers. He needed to hear it from her. He grabbed his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed her number. His heart raced as the phone rang, each ring making the distance between them feel even more insurmountable. The sound of the call disconnecting made his stomach tighten, and he stared at the phone in his hand, feeling completely alone. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. The hours dragged on as he sat in the dark, the documents spread out before him on the desk. His thoughts spun in circles, each one more frantic than the last. The discovery was too much to process. It shattered everything he thought he knew about Clara, about their life together. He had loved her, he still loved her. But could he ever look at her the same way again? The next day, everything felt different. The air in the house seemed thicker, heavier. When Clara came home from work that evening, the unease between them was palpable. She greeted him with a smile, her usual warmth barely masking the tension that hung in the air. She kissed him on the cheek, as she usually did, but Marcus barely responded. The kiss felt cold. The house felt cold. "Marcus, is everything okay?" Clara asked, her voice a little too bright, as if trying to hide the fact that something was wrong. He stood in the kitchen, his back turned to her as he took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside him. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. Clara hesitated, her smile faltering as she walked over to him. "What's going on?" she asked, her hand reaching for his arm. She sounded concerned, but Marcus could hear the nerves in her voice. She knew something was coming. He turned to face her, the documents in his hand. His voice came out in a whisper, shaking with anger. "Why didn't you tell me?" His eyes searched hers, pleading for an answer. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Clara's face went pale as her eyes flicked down to the documents in his hand. For a moment, she was silent. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She stepped back, a look of pure shock and fear in her eyes. "Marcus, she began, her voice faltering. "No," he cut her off, his tone growing sharper. "Don't. Just don't. I found it, Clara. I found everything." Her hand trembled as she reached for him, but Marcus took a step back, holding the documents tightly in his grip. "You lied to me. All this time. You've been lying to me." Clara's face was full of anguish as she fought for the right words. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never wanted to keep this from you. I was going to tell you, I swear. I didn't know how. I was afraid of what you'd think, of what you'd say." Marcus's heart raced as his emotions swirled inside him, a chaotic mix of betrayal, confusion, and hurt. His mind screamed at him, but his voice barely came out. "Why? Why did you keep it from me? I thought—" Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. "I thought you would leave me. I thought you wouldn't love me anymore. I was afraid—" But Marcus couldn't hear her anymore. The rage was taking over, the hurt so deep that it overshadowed anything she could say. The truth that Clara had been hiding from him was so raw, so unimaginable, that it felt like a betrayal on every level. "I don't know who you are anymore," Marcus said, his voice low and cold. The words left his lips like daggers. His hands shook as he turned away from her, needing to escape the suffocating weight of it all. Clara stood frozen, her tears falling silently as Marcus stormed out of the room, unable to look at her for one more second. Her secret, the thing she had held close for so long, had torn their world apart. The days that followed were a blur of tension, silence, and strained interactions. Marcus couldn't shake the image of the documents from his mind. The birth certificate, the medical records, the truth that Clara had kept hidden from him for so long. It was as if the foundation of everything he had believed in was crumbling beneath him. How could he ever trust her again? His mind raced constantly, replaying every moment with Clara, searching for signs, clues, anything that would have hinted at this secret. The happy memories they'd shared, their first date, their late-night talks, the way she looked at him when they'd said, "I love you," all of it felt tainted. He couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Clara had tried to explain herself, tried to tell him how afraid she was, how she had wanted to tell him the truth before their wedding, but fear had held her back. Fear of losing him, of him not accepting her for who she truly was. But as the days passed, Marcus's anger grew, overshadowing any attempts at understanding. His thoughts became consumed by the betrayal, by the fact that Clara had kept such a monumental part of her life from him. He had thought their love was built on honesty, on the idea that they shared everything. But now, everything felt like a lie. Clara, for her part, was heartbroken by the distance that had formed between them. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The man she loved was slipping away from her, and all she wanted was for him to understand, to forgive her. But no matter how hard she tried to make him see that she never meant to hurt him, it didn't seem to make a difference. The trust that had once bound them was shattered. One evening, Clara sat in the living room, staring blankly at the television, but she wasn't really watching it. The silence between her and Marcus had become unbearable. He was there physically, but emotionally he was a million miles away. When he did speak, his words were laced with anger, resentment, and hurt. And when he looked at her, there was a coldness in his eyes that she had never seen before. "Marcus," Clara said, her voice breaking through the silence, her eyes searching his face, "I know I've hurt you, but you have to understand. I didn't want to keep this from you. I thought you would leave me. I thought that if you knew the truth, you'd never look at me the same way. But I love you, Marcus. I need you to know that." Marcus didn't look at her. He sat at the kitchen table, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight with frustration. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. He was so lost in his own feelings that he didn't even look up when Clara spoke. "How could you keep this from me? How could you lie to me like this?" Clara's heart sank. "I didn't lie to you, Marcus. I didn't know how to tell you. It's not something I could just bring up. Not with the world the way it is. You don't understand what it's like, how hard it is to hide a part of yourself from the person you love the most." "Don't talk to me about what I understand," Marcus snapped, his voice rising in anger. "You've been living a lie, Clara. Our life has been a lie, and now everything is a lie." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and turned his back to her. His mind was a storm of confusion, betrayal, and deep-seated anger. Clara's tears welled up, but she didn't know how to fix it. How could she explain herself when he couldn't even look at her? How could she make him understand that she hadn't meant to hurt him? She stood up slowly, her hands trembling as she wiped her tears away. "Marcus, please," she whispered, her voice filled with desperation. "Please look at me. Let me explain. This secret is not who I am now. It's part of my past, part of what I had to go through to become the person I am today. The person you love. I'm still the same woman you married." But Marcus didn't respond. His mind was drowning in a mixture of emotions, rage, confusion, betrayal. The Clara he knew, the woman he had shared his life with, now felt like a complete stranger. She wasn't the woman he thought she was. She wasn't the woman he had fallen in love with. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks, and he felt his anger bubbling over again. "You don't get it, do you?" His voice cracked with frustration. "I don't even know who you are anymore. You've been lying to me for years. Years, Clara, and now I'm supposed to just accept it? Accept that everything I thought I knew was a lie?" Clara recoiled at his words. Each one felt like a knife twisting deeper into her chest. She had hoped, prayed that their love could withstand this, but now, as she looked into his eyes, she could see the distance growing. And in that moment, she knew. She knew their marriage was on the brink of collapse. The tension between them continued to simmer as the days passed. Marcus, consumed by his anger, became withdrawn, spending more time alone in his study, pacing the house like a caged animal. His once calm demeanor had shifted into something darker, something he didn't recognize. He began questioning everything, their entire life together, every moment they had shared. And with each passing day his anger deepened. Clara, meanwhile, tried everything she could to salvage what was left of their relationship. She would cook dinner, she would try to engage him in conversation, but it was always met with silence or cold, dismissive responses. She couldn't break through the wall he had built around himself. One evening, as Clara walked into the living room, she found Marcus sitting in front of the TV, but his gaze was fixed on nothing. His face was pale, his jaw clenched in frustration. Her phone was sitting on the coffee table, and she noticed she had a new message notification. She hesitated for a moment before sitting down next to him. "Marcus, can we please just talk about this? I know I've hurt you, but please, give me a chance to fix this, to make you understand." Marcus didn't look at her. He picked up her phone, unlocking it with a slight tremble in his hands. His eyes scanned the new message notification on the screen. "Can we meet up? I need to see you. Jess." His blood ran cold. The message was from Jessica, Clara's old friend, someone Marcus had never really trusted. He had never understood the closeness between the two women, and now, seeing this message, "Can we meet up?" Something inside him snapped. His vision blurred with rage, and he slammed the phone down onto the coffee table with a force that made Clara jump. "Who is this, Clara?" he demanded, his voice low but dangerous. His eyes burned with fury as he turned to face her. "Who is Jess?" Clara froze, her heart racing as she realized the implications of the message Marcus had just read. She hadn't meant for him to see it, but now it was out in the open. "Marcus, it's not what you think. It's just a friend." "A friend?" Marcus interrupted, his voice rising. "A friend who's texting you late at night? A friend you're hiding from me?" Clara's eyes widened in fear. She knew what was coming. She had seen the shift in Marcus over the past few days, and now it was too late to undo the damage. "Marcus, please, calm down. It's nothing, I swear, just a misunderstanding." But it was too late. Marcus was already beyond control. His eyes were dark with suspicion, and every fiber of his being was consumed with rage. Clara, in that moment, knew that the man she had married was slipping further away, and in her heart she feared he might never come back. The night seemed to hang heavier than any that had come before it. The weight of the argument, the tension between them, and the deepening fissures in their marriage all culminated in an overwhelming sense of dread. Marcus was no longer the man Clara had married. He was someone else, someone she didn't recognize, someone consumed by anger, betrayal, and a sense of overwhelming loss. The man sitting across from her was a shell of the protector and provider she had once known. Clara sat in silence, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap as she waited for Marcus to speak. He had barely said a word since he read the message from Jessica. His eyes, dark and hollow, were fixed on the floor, his breathing shallow and erratic. Every so often he would clench his jaw, as if holding back an eruption that he could no longer contain. "Marcus," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Please talk to me. I can't take this silence anymore." He didn't respond at first. The air was thick with tension, and Clara's heart raced in her chest. She had never seen him like this, his rage simmering beneath the surface, his face twisted with a mixture of confusion and fury. It wasn't just the secret she had kept, it was everything. Everything about their life, their love, their trust, was unraveling. "Why, Clara?" Marcus's voice was hoarse, barely audible. "Why did you keep it from me? Why didn't you tell me the truth?" Clara shook her head slowly, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't make him understand. Every time she tried, he pulled further away. The words she had once spoken so freely now seemed so distant. The love they had once shared was slipping through her fingers like sand. "I didn't know how," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't want to lose you. I was afraid. Afraid you'd never love me if you knew the truth." Marcus's laugh was hollow, full of bitterness. "Well, congratulations. You've done it anyway. You've lost me. All of this," he gestured to the room, "has been a lie. Everything I thought I knew about you, about us." It's all gone. You've taken that from me. Clara took a shaky breath, trying to gather herself. Marcus, please. I love you. I never meant to hurt you. You're the man I want to be with. I thought I could hide it, keep it from you. But I didn't know how to tell you that I was scared. Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping violently across the floor. His eyes were burning with anger now, and his fists were clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white. The fury that had been building inside him for days was now threatening to explode, and Clara could see it in the way he moved, quick, erratic, as though he couldn't control himself anymore. "I gave you everything, Clara!" Marcus shouted, his voice rising. "I trusted you, and you repaid me by lying, by hiding the truth from me. Do you even realize what you've done?" Clara stood up slowly, her hands raised in a futile gesture of peace. "Marcus, please, let's just talk about this. We can work through this. I swear we can." But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. His anger had taken on a life of its own. He looked at Clara as if he were seeing her for the first time, but the woman he once loved was now a stranger. All he could see was the lie, the deception, and as the seconds ticked by, his mind became clouded with a deep, consuming rage. "You don't get it, do you?" he spat, his eyes wide with fury. "You've destroyed everything. Everything I believed in. You've turned my life into a joke." Clara took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the danger rising, a sickening sense of fear creeping up her spine. Marcus had always been the calm one, the rock. But now he was spiraling. His words were cutting through her, each one deeper than the last. But she had to find a way to make him understand. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "I never wanted to hurt you. I swear, I never did." But her apology only seemed to fuel the fire. Without warning, Marcus stormed into the kitchen. Clara stood frozen in place, her breath catching in her throat as she heard him rummaging through the drawers. She followed him into the hallway, her heart beating loudly in her ears. "What are you doing?" she called out, her voice trembling. Marcus didn't respond. Instead, the sound of metal scraping against wood filled the air as he found what he was looking for, a knife. He gripped it tightly, his fingers shaking as he turned back toward Clara. His eyes were wide, wild, filled with something that resembled madness. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she realized what was happening. "Marcus, no, please, please don't do this. I love you. I never meant for any of this to happen." But the rage in Marcus's eyes was all-consuming. His expression was unrecognizable, twisted by the fury of betrayal and pain. The knife in his hand glinted menacingly in the low light, a silent promise of the violence that was about to unfold. "You ruined me, Clara," he muttered through clenched teeth. "You destroyed me. I have nothing left to live for. Nothing." Clara stepped back, fear flooding her body, but Marcus was already moving toward her. The knife gleamed in the dim light as he lunged forward, and with a single, savage motion, he slashed at her. Clara screamed, instinctively raising her arms to protect herself. The pain was excruciating as the knife cut through her skin, but it wasn't enough to stop her. She staggered backward, blood dripping from the wound as she tried to make sense of what was happening. "Marcus, stop," she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, and don't do this. We can work it out. I swear. I swear." But Marcus was beyond hearing her. His mind was lost in a sea of rage and confusion, and every part of him wanted to hurt her, wanted to make her feel the same pain he felt. The knife came down again and again, each blow fueled by the anger that had built up over the days of betrayal, confusion, and hurt. With each strike, the last remnants of the man he had been, the man who had promised to love and protect her, slipped further away. His mind was no longer his own. He wasn't thinking. He wasn't seeing her. He was lost in a fury so deep it consumed him completely. By the time Clara's body crumpled to the floor, her once beautiful face twisted in terror and pain, Marcus stood over her, panting heavily. His hands were covered in her blood, and his heart was racing in his chest. But there was no sense of satisfaction, no relief. only the sickening realization of what he had just done. He stepped back, staring down at her, his mind still a blur. The woman he had loved, the woman he had promised to cherish, was lying before him, dead. And as the horror of the situation began to sink in, he felt the full weight of his actions crashing down upon him. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to, Marcus mumbled, his voice shaking, but the words felt hollow, meaningless. Clara was gone, and there was nothing left to do but face the consequences of what he had just unleashed.